For the most powerful empire on earth, it was just another line on a map, a river called the Pra. But for the men sent to cross it, it was the boundary of their world, and for many, the end of it. On one side, the British Empire, an industrial titan armed with rifles, cannons, and an unshakable belief in its own destiny. On the other, the Ashanti Kingdom, a golden empire built on military might and fierce independence. For nearly a century, this river was the front line in a brutal, forgotten war that would push the British to their breaking point and expose the vulnerabilities of their global dominance. This wasn't a clash with a scattered collection of tribes. This was a collision with a centralised, sophisticated African superpower. This is the story of how a single kingdom, a suffocating jungle, and one unforgiving river challenged the course of an empire. To understand the sheer shock of the wars to come, we first need to appreciate the power of the two worlds set to collide. In the mid-19th century, the British Empire was a force of nature. Its navy ruled the waves, its merchants dominated global trade, and from the halls of London, the world was a chessboard whose pieces were moved with calculated precision. It was an empire of unprecedented scale and confidence. But on the west coast of Africa, in what is today modern Ghana, the empire's grand strategy ran to a very different kind of power. This was the Ashanti Empire. For 2 centuries, the Ashanti had forged a sprawling kingdom in the dense inland forests. Their capital, Kumasi, was a sophisticated urban centre. Their society was built around a complex bureaucracy, a formidable army, and a unifying sacred symbol. The Golden Stool, an object said to contain the very soul of the Ashanti nation. The source of their power was twofold. First was gold. The region was not called the Gold Coast by accident. The Ashanti controlled vast goldfields, and this immense wealth funded their society. Second was their command of trade, which for a long time had included the grim but lucrative trade in enslaved people. They were a regional superpower. They saw themselves as the masters of their domain, and in their eyes that domain stretched to the natural boundary of the great Pra River. And it was there, along the banks of that river, that these two worlds were destined for a collision that would last for nearly 100 years. For centuries, European powers had maintained a tentative foothold on the Gold Coast, a series of coastal forts built to facilitate trade. After Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, the focus shifted to ivory, palm oil, and above all, gold. The British coastal presence was organised around a protectorate over the Fante people, a confederation of states who were the Ashanti's traditional rivals. This placed Britain on a direct collision course with Ashanti expansionism. The political geography of the region was a tinderbox, but it was the physical geography that would define the conflict. Beyond the coast lay the jungle. This was the green hell of West Africa, a dense, suffocating and near impenetrable rainforest. The canopy blocked out the sun, leaving the floor in a perpetual humid twilight. There were no roads, only twisting footpaths that could turn to impassable swamp after a single downpour. Cutting through this landscape was the Pra River. It was more than a geographical feature. It was a line of immense significance. An 1831 treaty had officially recognised it as the border. To the Ashanti, crossing the Pra from the south was an act of invasion. To the British, an Ashanti army appearing on the southern bank was a declaration of war. But the jungle held a far more insidious danger. It was a breeding ground for diseases like malaria and yellow fever, invisible enemies that would prove far deadlier than any Ashanti warrior. This was the frontier the British faced, a land of immense wealth, defended by a powerful kingdom and a disease-ridden jungle. The uneasy peace along the Pra could not last. The core of the conflict was simple. Two expanding powers wanted control of the same region. Tensions simmered for decades, marked by skirmishes and diplomatic ultimatums. The final spark for the first major war came in 1823. Following a dispute where an Ashanti party kidnapped and killed an African soldier in British service, the situation escalated rapidly. The man who would turn this into a full-blown war was the new British governor, Sir Charles McCarthy. McCarthy was a product of his time, a veteran soldier with an unshakable faith in the superiority of European arms. He viewed the Ashanti as mere savages, whose military reputation he dismissed. He disastrously underestimated their strategic capabilities. Convinced that a short, sharp shock was all that was needed, he rejected negotiation and opted for a direct military confrontation. His plan was bold but fatally flawed. He intended to invade Ashanti territory with 4 separate columns. McCarthy himself would lead the main column, a tiny corps of British regulars and a larger contingent of Fante allies. In January 1824, Governor McCarthy marched his small force into the jungle, north toward the Pra River, supremely confident he was about to teach the Ashanti a lesson. Instead, he was marching headlong into one of the greatest disasters in the history of Britain's colonial wars. Sir Charles McCarthy's confidence was entirely misplaced. The dense jungle made communication between his columns impossible. His supply lines were chaotic, and his Fante allies, who understood the enemy far better than he did, began to desert. He pressed on, blind to reports that a massive Ashanti army of over 10,000 warriors was setting a trap. On January 22, 1824, near the village of Namanco, McCarthy's column walked straight into the ambush. A fierce firefight erupted. According to legend, as the Ashanti War drums thundered through the jungle, McCarthy coolly ordered his regimental band to play "God Save the King," a final, defiant act of imperial pride. The defiance was short-lived. A devastating realization spread through the ranks. Their ammunition was running out. 4 cases of supplies were brought forward, but upon opening them, 3 were found to inexplicably contain macaroni instead of cartridges. As their fire dwindled, the Ashanti warriors surged across the stream. The British line, now defenceless, was overwhelmed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The defeat was an annihilation. McCarthy was killed. His skull was rimmed with gold and became a ceremonial drinking cup for the Ashanti king. The news sent shockwaves through the British establishment. A governor had been killed and his army wiped out. The war dragged on for 7 more years. The British eventually rallied, and in 1826, at the Battle of Catamanso, also known as Dodowa, they managed to rout an Ashanti army thanks to a terrifying new piece of technology, the Congreve rocket. Finally, in 1831, a peace treaty was signed. The terms were simple. The Pra River was officially designated as the border. The first round had ended in a bloody stalemate, but the British had learned a terrifying lesson. For over 30 years, the peace held. The British consolidated control over the coast, while the Ashanti focused on internal affairs. But the underlying tensions remained. In 1863, the fragile peace shattered. An Ashanti chief, accused of crimes, fled across the Pra River into British protected territory. When the British governor refused to hand him over, the Ashanti king took it as a direct challenge. A large Ashanti army crossed the Pra once again. This conflict, the Second Anglo-Ashanti War, was not one of dramatic battles, but of slow, grinding misery. The British and their West Indian troops advanced, but soon encountered an enemy far more relentless than any human army: disease. The jungle became a death trap. Malaria and yellow fever, which locals called the River's Fever, swept through the ranks of the non-native soldiers. The campaign became a logistical and medical nightmare. The casualty rates from disease were astronomical. Neither side could claim a decisive victory, and eventually both forces simply withdrew. The war ended not with a treaty, but with a stalemate born of exhaustion and sickness. The Green Hell had protected the Ashanti Kingdom once again, and the region's reputation as the white man's grave was sealed. How could a pre-industrial African kingdom consistently challenge the armed forces of the world's largest empire? The answer lies in the sophisticated and formidable nature of the Ashanti war machine. The Ashanti military was based on a national levy system. The king, the Asantehene, could call upon quotas of fighting men from every region, allowing him to raise their vast armies that could number anywhere from 40,000 to 80,000 men. This ability to marshal overwhelming numbers was their first and most significant advantage. Their tactics were perfectly adapted to the jungle. They were masters of asymmetric warfare. Their signature tactic was a large-scale envelopment known as the horseshoe formation. As a British column marched down a narrow path, thousands of Ashanti warriors would move silently through the forest on either side. Once the enemy was deep inside the trap, the horns of the horseshoe would close around them, attacking from the front, the sides, and, most terrifyingly, from the rear. They used the jungle as a weapon, launching sudden ambushes from the thick undergrowth. They used psychological warfare to great effect, the ominous sound of their war drums unnerving opponents long before a battle began. Their commanders were skilled tacticians who knew every path and swamp in their domain. This combination of overwhelming numbers, brilliant jungle tactics, and fierce determination made the Ashanti army one of the most effective fighting forces on the continent. By the early 1870s, British patience had run out. In 1872, in a deal with the Dutch, Britain took control of all Dutch forts on the Gold Coast, including the key port of Elmina, over which the Ashanti had long-standing claims. They saw this as an intolerable provocation. In response, King Kofi Karakari ordered a massive invasion of the British Protectorate. London decided that this time there would be no retreat. The objective was to march on the capital, Kumasi, and break the power of the empire once and for all. To lead this undertaking, the government chose Major General Sir Garnet Wolseley. Wolseley was the polar opposite of the ill-fated McCarthy. He was a veteran of brutal campaigns in Burma, Crimea, and China. More importantly, he was a brilliant and meticulous organiser, a moderniser who believed wars were won by logistics long before the first shot was fired. Wolseley arrived on the Gold Coast in 1873. He understood that the jungle and its diseases were the primary enemy. He refused to be rushed. His methodical, no-nonsense efficiency was so impressive that it gave rise to a phrase that would enter the English language: all Sir Garnet, meaning that everything was in perfect order. Wolseley was not just going to fight a war, he was going to engineer an invasion. Wolseley's campaign was a masterpiece of Victorian engineering. He knew that conventional tactics were useless if his army could not move, communicate and stay healthy. His first task was to build a road. His Royal Engineers carved a military road through 100 miles of jungle, all the way to the Pra River and beyond. They built an astonishing 237 bridges and culverts. The most spectacular was the prefabricated iron and timber bridge over the Pra itself, manufactured in England and shipped to Africa in pieces, allowing the army to cross without breaking stride. Fortified camps were established every 10 miles. A telegraph wire was unspooled as the army advanced, allowing Wolseley at the front to communicate instantly with his base on the coast. He even brought in a steam traction engine, the first recorded use of a mechanical vehicle in a military campaign in Africa. Most importantly, Wolseley tackled the invisible enemy. Learning from the disaster of 1863, he made the systematic distribution of quinine a top priority. Every soldier was required to take a regular dose. While sickness rates were still high, the death rate from disease was drastically reduced. Wolseley had built a moving corridor of British industrial power that cut straight through the heart of the Green Hell. He had tamed the jungle, and now he was ready to cross the river. By January 1874, everything was ready. Wolseley's main fighting force of 2,500 elite British troops had arrived, including the famous Black Watch. On January 1874, the British Army marched in perfect order across the newly constructed bridge over the Pra Bay. For 50 years, this river had been the symbol of Ashanti defiance. Now, a British army was marching deep into their heartland. It was the West African equivalent of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. The Ashanti army, under General McCarthy, prepared a desperate defence. The climax came on January 31st at the Battle of Umaful. The Ashanti sprung their classic horseshoe envelopment, and for hours a ferocious battle raged. The British formed a large, hollow square, a disciplined formation that brought a constant wall of fire in all directions. The fighting was at close quarters, a confusing and terrifying affair. The Ashanti warriors, with incredible bravery, charged the square again and again, but they were cut down by volleys from the Martini Henry rifles. Though they suffered heavy casualties, the British square held. It was a decisive victory. After another sharp fight a few days later, the road to the Ashanti capital lay open. Wolseley's meticulous planning and superior firepower had broken the back of the Ashanti army. On February 4th, 1874, Sir Garnet Wolseley and his troops marched into Kumasi. They found a city largely deserted. King Kofi Karakari and most of the population had fled. The soldiers entered the royal palace and were stunned by what they found: a treasure trove of gold artifacts and elaborate textiles. But Wolseley had a problem. The rainy season was fast approaching. He knew that if his army was trapped by the rains, his victory could turn into a catastrophe. He needed a treaty, but the king was nowhere to be found. Frustrated and running out of time, Wolseley made a ruthless decision. He ordered the city of Kumasi to be destroyed. The Royal Engineers placed explosive charges in the royal palace, and the city was set alight. For 2 days, the Ashanti capital burned. As his army began its rapid withdrawal, Wolseley was finally met by envoys from the king. At the village of Fomena, the chastened Ashanti agreed to peace. The Treaty of Fomena was harsh. The Ashanti were forced to pay a massive war indemnity of 50,000 ounces of gold, renounce authority over their southern neighbours, and end the practice of human sacrifice. Wolseley had achieved his objective. The power of the Ashanti Empire was broken. It was a stunningly successful campaign, but it was a victory built on overwhelming force, and the final act of this long tragedy was yet to be written. The Segrenti War, as it came to be known, left the Ashanti Empire in chaos, but Britain's scramble for Africa was now in full swing. To secure their interests permanently against French and German rivals, informal influence was no longer enough. In 1896, in what is known as the Fourth Anglo-Ashanti War, the British marched on Kumasi again. This time there was no fighting. Citing unpaid fines from the 1874 treaty, they demanded full surrender. The Asantehene, Prempeh I, wishing to avoid more bloodshed, submitted. He and his family were arrested and exiled thousands of miles away to the Seychelles. The Ashanti Kingdom was formally annexed. It seemed the story was over. But in 1900, the new British governor, Sir Frederick Hodgson, made one final catastrophic miscalculation. In a speech of stunning arrogance, he demanded the one thing he could never have, the golden stool, so that he, the representative of the Queen, could sit on it. To the Ashanti, this was the ultimate sacrilege. But as the chiefs contemplated surrender, an elderly woman stood up. She was Yah Asantewa, the Queen Mother of a nearby state. In a legendary speech, she shamed the men for their cowardice. "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we will," she declared. "We, the women, will. We will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefields." Her words lit a fire. The final, desperate rebellion, the War of the Golden Stool, had begun. Led by Yah Asantewa, the Ashanti besieged the British fort at Kumasi. The fighting was the most intense of all the wars. But the outcome was inevitable. A massive British relief force broke the siege, and the rebellion was crushed. By 1901, Ashanti territory was fully annexed into the Gold Coast colony. After nearly a century of resistance, the drums of the Ashanti war machine had finally fallen silent. The British had finally crossed the Pra River. They had burned the capital, exiled its king, and crushed its final rebellion. But was this a true victory? The phrase, "nearly broke the British Empire," isn't about a single military defeat. It's about the staggering cost and the corrosive effect of a 77-year struggle. For the Ashanti, the wars were a catastrophe that ended their independence. Yet their identity was never truly conquered. The Golden Stool was never captured. It remained hidden, a potent symbol of their endurance. The fierce resistance led by figures like Yah Asantewa became an inspiration for future generations of anti-colonial nationalists. For the British, the Anglo-Ashanti Wars were a grim education. The conflicts became the empire's forgotten quagmire, a long struggle that exposed the limits of conventional military power. The ultimate success of Wolseley's 1874 campaign provided a new blueprint for colonial warfare. Engineering, medicine, and logistics were the keys to victory. But the conflict tempered Britain's imperial arrogance, proving that expansion would not be easy or cheap. The fight for the land beyond the Pra River cost thousands of lives and vast sums of money, a brutal reminder that even a line on a map can represent a barrier of blood, spirit, and resilience that can challenge the very foundations of an empire. If you found this journey into one of history's forgotten conflicts compelling, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's the best way to support the channel and ensure you don't miss our future explorations into the annals of history. Let us know in the comments which forgotten war you believe deserves more attention. Your support makes these videos possible.